All right, so hello, I am going to begin my lesson. Just for clarification to you, Professor, I did print out my lesson, so I will be looking down occasionally to go through it, and I also have stuff here up on my computer that I will be looking at to address what needs to be addressed during this presentation. So now that I have that out of the way, so we're going through my lesson plan. I decided to go with lesson plan number 2, not the first one I did, but the one that is due today. So for this one, I decided to change my grade level from 12th grade seniors, which is what I did in the first lesson plan, to in this one, I decided to go with high school freshmen, 9th grade, creative writing. For their academic context, they will need a basic grasp of crafting a story. And for language context, they will need to understand the basics of English grammar. Social context, they will need to have sustained engagement skills, as this will turn into a 2-week assignment with multiple days worth of steps. And that is for part 1, classroom context. Moving into part 2, classroom, or rather students needing adaptations. So part A, academic background. So today students will need to have the literary skills necessary to craft a rough draft. However, since this lesson is about writing a rough draft, they will have the opportunity to test out their writing skills without being graded. Today is simply about getting their ideas out there. They will most likely have access to translation software and or a translator working with them to be able to write some semblance of a story if they're the type of student that require that. In addition to that, as I speak a secondary language of Spanish myself, I can help the students who also speak it get their ideas out onto paper. For part B, language background, depending on their background, they can either use their translation software, translator, or I can step in and help. Since I'm bilingual, I have experience working in a dual language academy for Spanish. I can help them out here and there in getting their story ideas out. And then this is part C, social, cultural, emotional background. Students coming from other cultural backgrounds may have a different idea of what a story structure is. The example I use here is, I know that in Japan, they have a different way of structuring narrative events than American English does. And so in that instance, I would need to help them learn our idea of how we structure narrative events. It isn't like radically different, but it is different enough that someone reading their paper would think it was odd the way it's structured. And obviously for their grade, they would need to have it written in an American English way. So during the next part is where they would get help in learning that. So we move into part 3, content standards and objectives. The content standards I'm using are the California, the CCSS. I'm using W3.A, which is to engage and orient the reader by setting out a problem, situation, or observation and its significance, establishing one or multiple points of view, and introducing a narrator and or characters. Create a smooth progression of experiences or events. And then for the ELD standards, I'm doing bridging, writing, W.3.10.A, which is write longer and more detailed literary and information texts collaboratively and independently using appropriate text organization and growing understanding of register. So if we move down into the objectives, we are doing the learning objectives, which are that all students will be introduced to the rough draft and how to turn their outlines from the previous lesson into a narrative. This is Bloom's taxonomy level analysis. For the language objectives, all students will need to craft a single story in English with at least 90% proper grammar and spelling. And this is the taxonomy level of comprehension. Now, again, obviously the rough draft doesn't need to be like totally perfect. And later on in the lesson, I will be emphasizing that to them, but they do need to start, even at this point, showing some mastery of basic grammar, spelling, so on. So we move into social objectives. So all students will need to demonstrate their grasp of the structure of American stories and literary writing by writing a first draft by the beginning of class tomorrow. And this is the taxonomy level of creation/innovation. So for the modified objectives and rationale, we go down to learning objectives. So in this one, students may need individualized attention in small groups. They might need this in order to learn how to write a rough draft if they've either never written one or still do not understand how. And this is the taxonomy level of comprehension. For their language objectives, students may need help with their grammar, which I can provide during class, but it isn't as important during this step of the process. We will be analyzing it tomorrow with the following day, so they need only have their story written out for us to be able to look over. And this is the taxonomy level of knowledge. And for the last one, social objectives, students may need to understand why stories are structured in a particular way and the difference between academic and literary writing. It isn't obvious at first, but stories are written in a way to be relatable, but still artful. And this is the taxonomy level of evaluation. And actually, this one might just apply to students in general, learning the difference between academic and literary writing. So they're not writing an essay here. It's going to be creative. It's a creative story. So now we move into part 4 of the lesson, which is instructional resources. And the only resources that I would need for this day is a computer, a whiteboard and marker, and a college ruled notebook paper with a pen or a pencil. And this is only in case the students either didn't bring their device charged or at all, because I've been in classes where the students either don't bring their laptop at all, or they bring it and it only has like a 12% charge. And so in cases like that, for my classes personally, I know some teachers like to let their students sit in an alternative desk to charge their devices. But from my experience in classrooms, I've seen the students will purposely not let their devices be charged fully so that they can sit in the alternative desk, either because they just don't like sitting where they sit or because the charger's near one of their friends who they do want to sit near. So I like to let them know that if they don't charge it, they have to just switch to pen and paper, or pencil and paper. And this motivates them to keep their devices charged or just bring them. And then the whiteboard and marker, which I'll delve into further when I talk more about this lesson, will be used to just show examples and discuss with the class and have something for them to see as we're discussing things. And then the computer would just be for me to quickly pull up examples of something that I could possibly show them, if need be, examples of other stories or such and such. For adapted instructional resources, there would be individual devices for students that may need translation software. And I've seen this in person. So I've seen students that on their laptops have a program that is a translation software of some kind. Some students just use like Google Translate, but I don't know what program they were using specifically, but I have seen students using a specific program. I don't know if it was provided by the school or not, but they were all using it. So I assume it was, and it was for them to type something in real quick and quickly have it translated. So that would be something that they would use, something that would be provided by the school. I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure the school provides it. So now we move into part 5, teaching the content. So we move into A, introduction/anticipatory set. So students will be handed their outlines back as they walk into class so they can sit quietly to begin reviewing my notes left on their paper. So just to have a quick recap from lesson plan number 1. In lesson plan number 1, they were learning how to write outlines, and they were completing them by the end of class, and they would have turned them into me, at which point I would have taken them home and looked over them and jotted down notes on their papers, either on their story structure, their grammar, just anything in general I had to say would be jotted down on their outlines. And then that's what they would be handed back as they're walking into class. So I write here, as the class walks into the classroom for the day, they will be handed back their outlines and quietly begin reviewing any notes left on their paper with instructions up on the whiteboard, telling them to begin considering what they like about my notes, what they don't. And I will let them know as they're handed back their paper to look up at the whiteboard in front for directions. And this is, so as this is a creative class, my notes aren't the end all be all. They can, if they want to, stick to their guns and say, hey, I don't agree with this narrative change, this dialogue change, whatever. And hey, if they think what they have written is better than what my notes suggest, they can stick to their guns and they can keep going in that direction. I will let them know that ultimately at the end of the assignment, if they decided to go on their own and it didn't turn out, satisfactorily, then their grade might suffer because of that. But they are more than happy to try to stick to their guns if they so choose. I also say the students will have additional instructions on the whiteboard telling them to prepare to take notes for the upcoming instruction. And so as the last student receives their paper back, I will go up to the front of the class, I'll take roll, and then I will move over to the whiteboard and prepare to begin discussing what they will be doing for today's class. And checking for understanding for the introduction/anticipatory set, I will do modeling, which is that I can ask the students if they have any questions regarding the notes I left on their outlines and whether they agree, why they might not agree with what I've written. And then depending on that, we can have a quick discussion about that. Adaptations for the set, students will again possibly need translation software and or a translator. What I will do is I will speak clearly and attempt to engage with the students so that they can participate and gain confidence in an English setting. I have also seen this in class where students are given a personal translator. The translator may not be personal to just them, but like them and their fellow cohorts that may also speak their language, whatever that may be. If there's a group of 3 students that speak Spanish or Greek or Mandarin, whatever, they have a translator that helps them. And that is also school provided for them. Then we move into B, focused direct instruction. The students will take notes after I lecture about rough drafts so that they can have an idea of what they need to do. So in this part, I will begin by explaining to the students the importance of a rough draft and assure them that this, like the outline, will not be graded. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where I will assure them that like the rough draft, like the outline, is not graded. So they don't need to be super scared about that. And though the students will understand that the rough draft doesn't need to be perfect, it does need to show their attempts at writing a cohesive story according to what they wrote on their outlines. Next, I will go over the specifics of developing realistic dialogue for a reading audience, how to interweave multiple plot threads, and how to sequence narrative events. Once the students understand exactly what I'm expecting of them for the rough draft, I will go over on the whiteboard the differences in how a natural conversation can sound versus a jilted, awkward sounding one. I'll also show them multiple plot threads and how to take those and weave them so as not to constantly stumble over itself, with examples from either books we've read that semester or just books that are, probably popular at the moment. Sequencing narrative events, well, will be once again solidifying what they should have done during their outline phase. Next, I will be going through contextualization, which is I will be walking around the classroom, making sure the students are understanding what they're doing. This will give them the opportunity to get extra help that they need in case they might not understand how to write their draft, or if they can't seem to be able to translate their outline to a narrative. And I'm not talking about translating like languages. I'm talking about just like the general sense of the word of being able to take something from their outline and move it over into a narrative rough draft. Now I'm talking about adaptations. So students coming from other cultures may not understand why the stories are structured the way that they are. So in this case, if they still don't get it, I can work in small groups with them to explain the differences between American English narrative structure and other cultures, and how they need to structure their rough drafts. And so obviously for me at this point in the semester, I'll probably, I should know where the students are from if they don't speak English well. And I will have done research, especially because since this is my specific discipline, English, how they might view stories in such a way that might be different from American English. So now we move into guided practice. So they will have the period to create their rough drafts. So the students have the rest of the period to take their outlines and translate it to a rough draft. I will finish up my instruction, my direct instruction, and allow them to begin trying to hash out a story from whatever they had written on their outlines, along with the notes I left the previous night. So if I'm checking for understanding, I will do this through additional explanation. So if the students are not understanding how to get their outlines down into a narrative, additional explanation can be given in order to make sure they grasp what they'll be writing in order to have something to present to their small groups the next day. In addition to this, I can sit with individual students who I may notice struggling with the assignment in order to get them to jot something down on their rough drafts. Adaptations for the guided practice. They can use translation software / translator. So I can either have the students write their stories in their native languages and then run them through translation software, which they can then refine, or I can have a provided translator help them. D, for closure. So tasks and rationale. Students can discuss with each other how they structure their stories. So how we will do this. So in the last 10 minutes of class or so, I can have the students turn to a partner and talk about what their stories are looking like. So this is the time when they can turn to their shoulder partner, someone close to them, person behind them, right in front of them, whatever, just as long as they're within their vicinity. They're not getting up and moving around at this point. And this is where they get to discuss with someone next to them. Hey, what's your story looking like? This is what my story is looking like. And this is just very quickly so they can swap and see what other people are doing. So if I'm checking for understanding for the closure, so how I do this, additional explanation again. So I can go up to the whiteboard and I can point out the structure that the different types of drafts should be in, or I can also point back out anything I wrote on the whiteboard during the anticipatory set. Adaptations for the closure are contextualization. So I can have students compare drafts and groups by languages they speak natively and help one another, along with me explaining how they're doing. So then I can go over and look at what they're doing. So now we're going into part 6, independent practice. So this is where they will be taking my direct instruction. They will format the rough drafts and finalize them into a state to be presented in groups the following day. So these students will need to take what they've been working on and make sure that it's in a state ready to be presented. Whatever the students aren't able to finish is their responsibility to complete at home and bring back the following day for peer review and self-edit. So if there's probably no way they could finish a rough draft in a normal high school period. I don't think even I, at my level with a bachelor's degree and specifically in this subject, could do that, a full rough draft, especially what I'm expecting of them. So I'm expecting at least, I want this story to be at least 2 full pages. Sorry, I wanted it to be 3 full pages It can go on to the fourth, but it cannot be more than the fourth, but it has to be at least 3 full pages. So it's quite a bit of writing, honestly. So they'll probably get maybe a page and a half. So it'll be their responsibility that night as homework to finish it. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect, but they do need to have it completed so that they can have something to present to their group the next day. So if I'm checking for understanding for the independent practice by modeling, so I would quickly format a narrative structure on the whiteboard for students to see and point out examples from stories we've read through the semester, from other stories, probably something generally popular. Adaptations, students may again need translation software. The students will have a device that will allow them to access translation software to fully understand what they're doing in the rough drafts. They will probably also have a translator helping them from what I've seen. Part 7, follow-up assessment and instruction plan. So what sources? Informal. So the students have no pressure to write a masterpiece at this point. The students have already been informed by this point that the point of this assignment is to get their ideas down into a narrative. What they bring back the following day is for them to present in their small groups, but not for a grade, only for them to get ideas and collaborate with fellow classmates. What's my reteaching plan? Well, if students did not complete a rough draft or the version they bring in the next day is completely off base, then I will need to give them a story to work off of. Right. Okay. So this, I list it right here. I say that this will remove the creative aspect of the story crafting, but it will allow the student to learn how a rough draft should look and give them something to work off of that they can later alter to better fit their vision. So so as I point out here, so basically what I would be doing is I would already have something in mind that they can work off of, some kind of story, pre-arranged story. And this would have been something from the outline phase. But I guess I can move it forward in this phase too. So like if their outline was good, what I could do at this point is just say like, hey, we're going to abandon this outline for right now. Going to give you a pre-approved story, and you're going to work off of this. So take this home and turn this into a story. And then we get to the teaching plan. So for the students who satisfy what I'm looking for the next day, they will be getting into groups and presenting to fellow classmates. So the students will be prepared the next day to get into small groups of 4 in order to present their work. By doing this, they will get to see how other students have formatted their stories and get ideas for theirs to either refine their story or change it at this point, honestly, if they want to. It's still early enough in the process that they could change their story. I wouldn't advise it anymore at this point, but they can if they want to. Depends on what their level of comprehension and writing ability is. And that is the end for that. Attachments for lesson, I don't have any because today is basically just an instructional day. There's nothing that they need from me. They already have what they need, which is the outline from the previous lesson. And this is just something I'm giving them back. It's not something new. It's just something that I'm giving them back with my notes on it. And I don't need anything from them at this point. They need to go home and finish their rough draft and then bring back that the next day. And so that's the end of that. But I'm going to real quickly click on over here so I can see something else. So I need to address a behavior and an EL in the class. So if I'm addressing an English learner, I guess I can say that I've been addressing the English learner, but if I had a specific, for instance, Spanish-speaking student, again, they would most likely have a translator working with them in the class. And if they don't, I speak Spanish, so I can directly help them. But I guess let's try a Greek student, because I've seen Greek students and I don't know how to speak Greek. I'm not even sure what they actually call their language. I doubt it's Greek. They probably don't call it Greek. but just for the sake of this, I'm going to refer to it as Greek. So yeah, hopefully they would have a translator in the class, but they would definitely have translation software. And at that point, we can go through that and we can, um, uh, where did I write that? I did write it somewhere in here that one option for them is that they can write their rough draft in their native language. So like, for instance, this Greek student, they could write it in Greek, use their translation software into English, and then from there they can refine it so that it actually sounds good in English, because a lot of translation software doesn't translate very well into other languages. And I've seen that going from English to Spanish and from Spanish to English. I can see in both directions that the translations aren't ever good. They're passable, but they're not good. So they could that is an option to them. Hopefully, if they have a translator, they can help the student um, do that. And then a behavior that I would address in the class. So the behavior I'm picking is a student that is constantly trying to leave the classroom. So this is something that I've encountered as a substitute, and it's a student that has to keep using the bathroom multiple times throughout the class, or they need to go outside to blow their nose, or they need to get up and go outside to sanitize their hands now, or get water, or refill their water. So the general behavior is that they just need to keep leaving the classroom. So the way I've addressed this behavior and the way that I would address the behavior if I had presented this in class would be to go over to the student. And this is, as quietly as possible, because I know it's embarrassing to be talked to sternly by an instructor. So I would quietly address what's going on, and try to figure out what the problem is at first. So like, hey buddy, are you sick? Um, you know, is your tummy sick? Is is there something wrong with your stomach? Is that why you keep asking to go to the restroom? Or do you feel dehydrated? Is that why you keep needing water? Or are you feeling sick? Is that why you keep blowing your nose? What's the issue? How can I help you with that? If they're feeling an irritable bowel thing in their stomach, then maybe I just need to send them to the nurse. And the nurse can address that with them. Hey, figure out what's going on. If they're feeling sick, again, send them to the nurse. I really shouldn't have students in my class that are sick feeling, especially, with the prevalence of COVID still. And that's something that I have gotten in schools, told for me down from the principals and stuff, that if I have students that are appearing sick or tell me that they feel sick, to send them to the nurse so that the nurse can determine, because again, I'm not a healthcare worker. I don't know how to address that kind of stuff. So the nurse can check their temperature, see what's going on with them. Or if honestly, I've had students who are just like, look, I need to go outside, I need to breathe. I know students feel claustrophobic. I have people in my family that feel claustrophobic in varying spaces. They can go from an elevator to even, some classrooms don't feel very big, especially like the trailer classrooms that are like temporaries but have been there for 20 years. That can feel really confining to some students, and they feel like they need to get up and get air. So I think the very first thing you need to do is try to level with them and reason with them and see what's going on. Because if you're immediately accusatory, anybody would get immediately, I would get defensive if someone immediately came at me accusatorily if I used the restroom more than once during a class period. So I think leveling with them is best, and that's what I've done in class, and it usually works. I haven't had an issue with a student becoming aggressive or anything. So I think that's the behavior I would address. So I'm just going to quickly pull this back up again. So one of the most challenging parts of my lesson plan. So I think the most challenging part of my lesson plan is that I need to figure out how to get the students just to write a rough draft, I think, because from what I've seen in classes and having students turn in things for other teachers, it's very difficult now, or maybe it always has been, and I just didn't see it when I was a student because I wasn't obviously paying attention to other people's work, but it's very hard to assign someone 3 pages and have them actually turn in 3 pages, or have them turn in 3 well-written pages. And then I think the way that I can address that is to make sure that the students understand what they're supposed to do. And also, like I said, take the burden off, because I feel like when I was in school, even things like rough drafts were given some kind of grade, but by taking that burden off of them, it really alleviates a lot of pressure that they feel. And um, as for my self-reflection, I think that I need to possibly learn how to write more on my lesson plans. I feel like they're a little bare bones at times, but I am learning, and I feel like this lesson plan is a lot more detailed than my first lesson plan. And that is something that I am currently working on, will keep working on, and I do appreciate the feedback on it. So that is all. And thank you for watching my presentation.